We try to help incentivize businesses to come to North Carolina, and this just falls right into that economic development side. If we don't invest and they can't invest, then we're going to continue to lose as a direct result of this natural disaster.
This is Real State, a podcast from CSG South. Join us as we talk with policymakers and public leaders shaping state-level decisions across the South and explore how ideas move from policy to real impact.
Hello, and welcome to Real State. I'm your host, Lindsey Gray. Across the South, states are facing an increasing number of natural disasters, from hurricanes and flooding to severe storms and infrastructure strain. These events are not only testing emergency response systems, but also shaping how states plan, budget, and build resilience for the future. North Carolina has been at the center of this conversation, responding to multiple major disasters in recent years. Today, we're joined by Representative Mark Pless, a legislator, first responder, and chair of the House Emergency Management and Disaster Recovery Committee. He has been directly involved in guiding recovery efforts across Western North Carolina. His district has faced a series of significant challenges, from the pandemic to Tropical Storm Fred to most recently Hurricane Helene. Representative Pless, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's jump in. Before we get into specific policies, I want to start with your unique perspective, serving both as a policymaker and a first responder. You've experienced disasters both on the ground and in the legislature. So how does that dual perspective shape the way you approach disaster policy in North Carolina?
You know, a lot of times legislators and other folks, they don't have a background in the particular areas that they have to deal with. I've been fortunate, having spent 30 years doing rescues, being in the water, doing the initial aftermath, and helping the community through little disasters that come about from time to time. So I got to see a different side of it that most people never get to see. My hard part was with Tropical Storm Fred, figuring out what a legislator is supposed to do, because I had not been one of those but about 8 months when that happened. So I had to have a lot of help from then Speaker Moore to try to get me with the right footing so that I could be of benefit to those folks. But I think the thing that it brings to the table the most, government is not always in the middle of everything. A lot of times things go by and folks just accept the fact that government is too large and they don't need to be in your daily lives. But when it comes to disaster, that's entirely different. They are relying on us to be able to help them. And that's one of the things that helped me to know that, hey, if you're not fighting for them, Tropical Storm Fred's going to come and go. These lives are going to be destroyed. These homes are going to be damaged, and they're going to be that way 10 years from now as people try to recover. Their only hope in some of these situations is the government.
And when you think about these events like Tropical Storm Fred and Hurricane Helene, along with the economic disruptions that your district has experienced, such as a large mill closure, which we've had several of those across the southern states, what lessons from those experiences have most directly influenced policy decisions in the General Assembly that you've seen and you've been a part of?
You know, over the last 3 terms, there's been so many things go wrong, it seems, in our county that it's been nice to be able to help. The mill closure came at one of the worst times. It had been anticipated for years, but Tropical Storm Fred was in the just barely in the rearview mirror. We were moving forward with that. Our town was trying its best to get back on its feet. Well, now their main supplier of tax revenue announces that they're closing. So they're losing the income tax, they're losing the sales tax, and now they're losing property tax. So how do you help a community recover when their largest employer, over 1,000 employees, is suddenly saying, okay, we're closing the door in 3 to 4 months. We're not going to be here to help see you through this. It was definitely eye-opening, and it was difficult to see and explain to a lot of folks in Raleigh Fortunately, I have a good group down there, and they paid real close attention, and they were willing to hear me whenever I would tell them how this was going to impact. So they stepped up, and we've had some extra money for several years now, and they were willing to let us have that money to try to help keep Canton's feet under them and the county till they could find a way to get back on their feet by themselves.
And I'm glad you had the General Assembly backing you for a lot of those transitions. You've certainly taken more hits than some of the other areas that we've seen in the South. So those real world experiences often translate directly into how states allocate resources and prioritize investment, which you just shared some of that. So over the past 2 years, what have been the most significant investments North Carolina has made in disaster response and resilience through the state budget? I know there's been more efforts done besides that, the efforts directly in your county, but some that are statewide as well. So what do those look like for the state budget?
We were able to get some funding out there for Department of Transportation. A lot of our roads get washed away when we have these storms, and they have been able to go back in. And when they rebuild this time, they had money dedicated to putting in larger culverts, to changing the drainage systems, to doing things that are going to keep those same roads that wash out time after time. They're able to not have to deal with that. And then we recently got 20 million that went to the local governments. So now they can actually decide how they spend it. There were some awards given out in the last few weeks by the governor's office to some communities that had passed through that money to where they were going to be able to do things they ordinarily would not. They'll take any help we can get, but a lot of times FEMA and even the state just says, build it back the way it was. Well, now they're able to change the way they do that. The one that I really enjoy the most, I was able to champion, was for the fire service. A lot of folks do not understand that most fire departments are not county employees. They're not city employees. They are private contracted fire departments. So most folks don't understand they don't qualify for a lot of public assistance. So I was able to get them $50,000 per department in the Helene area to compensate for some of the things that insurance just wouldn't cover, the fuel that they were having to spend, the things that they were having to do in order to protect their community for months on end. They would have just been out that money, and it would have inhibited their ability to grow and their ability to keep up to date with things that are going on. So we were able to get about 18 million to split among all of those departments. And at the end, it wound up being a great plan, a great idea. And they were very appreciative of the abilities to keep doing the things that they're doing. Some of them are still in the process of spending their money, but it went kind of unrestricted. It's for anything that they feel that was necessary for their district other than hiring folks.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. That is definitely a new fact that I did not know. But we've all seen those videos with the roads being washed away in North Carolina, and they're tragic. And so it is nice that y'all are rethinking how to build those when you have the opportunity to put those back. So as the chair of the Emergency Management and Disaster Recovery Committee, how do y'all evaluate whether those investments are helping communities recover? Of course, you've just mentioned the firefighters, the fire department, as well as rebuilding infrastructure. But I'm sure y'all still have to evaluate those investments and making sure that money is going where you all intended it for it to go. So especially in the areas that you've experienced repeated disasters, just how are y'all evaluating that investment and that recovery effort?
We're in a position now to where the money is just now being spent. It takes a while to get government money out to where it needs to be. We also have a shortage of contractors, which most people don't realize. We were able to expand our Western Carolina University engineering school a couple of years ago. They are in the process of fixing it because we recognized early before this that we didn't have enough folks to rebuild when things happen. So now we're in the middle of that. The college will be able to help us in a few years with some more engineers that can put this together. But I guess the easiest answer to that is we're going to have to wait until work is completed and then evaluate the small storms and see how the impact changed. Department of Transportation does a really good job of keeping an eye on things, and they will be letting us know, hey, this didn't work or this did work based off of some of the storms that we'll see. It's not unusual to get a 7 or 8 inch rainstorm. It took 20 inches or more for the damage that everyone saw, but we'll have some small storms to see if it's working over the next couple of years when they get their work finished.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure y'all will be watching that closely and watching these communities and making sure that they're able to have that resilience aspect, not just recovery. So, looking specifically at the 2026 legislative session, which you all are still in, what additional priorities or gaps are shaping the conversations around disaster funding at the state level?
One of our biggest things that we have tried to do in the last 4 years has been private roads and bridges. That's not something that typically the state of North Carolina has helped a whole lot with. We have run out of money for what was done with Helene. There's a few things that are being done, I believe, incorrectly. So we're going to have to go and have some conversations when we get back later on in April. Department of Transportation has criteria to rebuild roads, bridges, things like that. Well, they've taken and applied some of those to emergency management's rebuild of these private roads and bridges. So we think they're building larger than what is necessary. So we're going to have to evaluate that and reach a consensus on how much more money, because according to what we've put out so far, they have already spent every bit of that, and they need several $1,000,000 more in order to be able to finish the project. And we don't want folks to be left out, but we're going to have some heart-to-heart conversations about that. The other side to that is going back to the fire departments. We have a lot of fire stations that are destroyed. We have a lot of them that can no longer function. They are able to get some FEMA help in some of those situations, but it's only what they can go back to. Some of them need to be relocated. So we're going to have a conversation about getting them out of harm's way. FEMA doesn't usually tell them you have to move, but they recommend it. But these fire departments are strapped and they're not capable of moving on their own. So that's going to be one of the real big conversations, the private roads and bridges. And then what are we going to do about these fire departments to where when the emergency happens, they're not having to try to protect their own house. They're able to help everyone else.
It's such a complex, layered issue, and unfortunately, it's likely never ending with the disasters that we're seeing hit our southern states in particular. So, disaster recovery often depends on strong federal state coordination, particularly through FEMA, which you just mentioned. And from your perspective, what has North Carolina's experience shown about where that partnership works well and where timelines or requirements can create challenges for communities trying to recover?
I think a lot of folks misunderstand what FEMA does, what their role in this is, what the state's role in this is, what local government's role is. It took me a little while to figure that out. I had my practice storm with Tropical Storm Fred because it pretty much was mostly my district, was the areas that were affected the most. FEMA is there to help folks in the initial onset. They need housing, they need clothing, they need their furnishings, they need all of these things done. So FEMA plays that role. And once they transition out of getting money directly to people, which the state of North Carolina, we're not allowed to do that. We can't hand anyone money, but the federal government can through the FEMA program. So once they get them stabilized there, FEMA starts the evaluation process of how are we going to help local governments? How are we going to help rebuild roads? The assessment part of that is very slow. It's very frustrating. And, if I could speed it up, I would. But there's not a way for me to tell them how to do it. But I have noticed that some of the safeguards they have in place are beneficial. Their biggest challenge so far seems to be keeping people to do the assessments and the evaluations. Those are contract positions that come and go. Some folks do it and don't decide that really what they wanted to do, so they just don't sign back up again. So that puts a new contractor doing it. We're able to take their assessments, their evaluations, and we're able to come back in on the backside of that and help supplement some of that funding so that these projects can continue. So far, we have tried to take everything off of local government to where the state of North Carolina can pay the match. We have a lot of money sitting there waiting on those days to happen. If they need to expand or they need to do something that FEMA won't allow, then we need to have a different conversation with them. And it may be that ultimately, if they want to do things a little better or a little different than where they were, they may have to put some money forward in order to do it the way they want. But we're going to try our best to make sure that we supplement what FEMA does and help local governments to not have to make that investment.
And beyond funding, and you've just touched on this a little bit, so I might go just a touch deeper. So beyond funding, policy design plays a major role in how effectively states can respond and recover. So what types of policies, whether related to infrastructure, emergency management coordination, or rebuilding, has proven most effective in strengthening North Carolina's disaster resilience? And to that end, from the state perspective, since there is a federal and a local government perspective, as you just walked through, and having to figure all of that out. So what has proven to be most effective in strengthening North Carolina's disaster resilience from a state perspective?
Helping the folks at home was a challenge through Matthew and Florence, which happened in 2016 and 2018. Fortunately, I was placed on the committee for oversight. After Tropical Storm Fred, I had a different perspective on some of that, so they put me on the committee. And we were able to learn that a lot of our policies and a lot of the things that we were doing did not work in 2016 and 2018, but we didn't change any of it. We left it alone because either the General Assembly didn't dig deep enough, or there was too many things going on by the time they realized the failures for them to be able to really dig into it. So we found that whenever they're building homes, we were making folks bid at low amounts when, in fact, through HUD, they could do up to $250,000 per individual without having to bid for anything. So we were slowing down rebuilding houses because of our own policies and the way we had to do things. So we relaxed that in a bill and made it to where we matched what the federal government said was acceptable. We still have our accountability and the things that we need to make sure that they don't step over that. But as the rebuild process goes for homes, it should move faster. The other side to that is we had to change a little bit and allow our inspectors to come from Raleigh to go to these areas and allow them to be able to go in and make sure that everything was built back to code and things were done correctly. We made a minor mistake in that whenever we were doing it and didn't realize that we were sending folks in to say, yes, you can do this, but they didn't have the authority to sign to say that, yes, you can do it. So we were actually overburdening the locals because now the inspector there still had to go out and either take the word of a total stranger or view it themselves. So even though we had allowed things to happen, maybe that wasn't the best way to handle it. So we've had some positives and we've had some things that, well, maybe we should have thought that through just a little bit further.
There's always lesson learned in these things, and even states that are not dealing with as many disasters as North Carolina has faced over the last couple of years are grappling with housing issues very similar to what you just explained. So I can't imagine if you layer disaster response on top of that, just all the things that North Carolina has tackled and the lessons that, to your point, that have come out of those learnings. So. You've also supported targeted efforts like assistance for short line railroads impacted by Hurricane Helene, and you mentioned earlier with the firefighters and the fire departments. So how do those more focused policy actions fit into the broader recovery strategy?
Well, most people, whenever they look at the short line railroads, they don't understand what's truly at stake because you kind of take them for granted. You don't see them. They travel areas that most people, they may have to stop for a crossing periodically, but they really don't know what they do. Where that finally hits home, during Tropical Storm Fred, I learned a lot about them because of Blue Ridge Railroad. They were part of the paper mill and they were delivering to the mill. Well, they had a lot of damage, so we were able to go in and help them to stay vibrant and be able to continue to service our mill because of the amount of damage they had. Well, when the mill closed, that took a lot of their cars offline to where they were not going to be profitable. So whenever we had this happen with Hurricane Helene, I have a manufacturing facility in Waynesville that has about 350 employees. They were paying $70,000 a week for content to be brought for them to continue manufacturing because the rail line was offline. So when you did the numbers, you looked at the loss from the paper mill, it wound up being that we had a major problem. Why would they build that rail back without us helping them for a few customers that were not the paper mill that we had lost? So it was not profitable. It was not something that we felt they would do. But Great Smoky Mountains Railroad also brings in tourism. They bring in almost 300,000 people a year, close to $210 billion. I'm sorry, $210 million in revenue. So what ends up happening whenever we go without them, we lose the people that we need in Western North Carolina. We put money forward for advertising so that everyone would realize Western North Carolina was open. But if the rail line is destroyed and they can't take those rides and they can't pay, then we're losing out hotels, we're losing out restaurants, we're losing out the other events that people do while they're here. Nantahala Outdoor Center, a lot of things bring folks to this area, but the train is kind of key to it. So without some kind of help, we were going to lose a lot of money. And we try to help incentivize businesses to come to North Carolina. And this just falls right into that economic development side. If we don't invest and they can't invest, then we're going to continue to lose as a direct result of this natural disaster.
Just so many people were impacted by this. And North Carolina operates a bit differently than many states when it comes to the legislative structure. So, North Carolina does not have a traditional constitutional sine die. And the legislature is effectively able to remain in session year round. So, how has that structure influenced the state's ability to respond to disasters in real time? And how has it impacted it?
You know, when I first ran for office, I was told you're going to go in January, you're going to go out around July 1, you're going to be okay till next year, and you're going to come back. Well, that's not been my reality. It may have been the reality before, but I think COVID is what actually changed that from everything that everyone has told me in the legislature. They come to realize that even though we're a part-time legislature, there are real-time needs annually that come up. And if we're not in session, we can't deal with those. We can't address those in any way, shape, form, or fashion. We have to wait till we're back. And a lot of times that crisis or that emergency or that need is gone by the time we get back, or the destruction from not being able to meet that need. So we check in about every 3 or 4 weeks. We have some dates that are listed in there. And if there's nothing for us to do, we don't come back. A lot of us are in Raleigh doing oversight hearings and things like that right now anyway. So it usually coordinates with at least one of those weeks that we're supposed to be back, that I have to be back in Raleigh anyway. So we can deal with things. Having that puts a real great peace of mind to me, because I know from my experiences, we don't get to work on a calendar time. So Tropical Storm Fred was in August. We would have been home. Hurricane Helene, we would have been home. Had we have not been in session, then there's not a way that we could have done anything. So I like the model. It gets tiring, and a lot of folks wonder why we're in Raleigh all the time as a part-time legislature. But, you know, it's worked out well for the last 6 years.
And disasters don't know holidays. Disasters don't know session. So it is nice that y'all have a little bit of that flexibility to remain focused, and that continuity that some of our other states may or may not get. They'll have to be called into special session to deal with that. So do you think that flexibility has accelerated y'all's response and recovery efforts in North Carolina?
It does. We are able to put some folks together, name committees like for the Helene committee, and folks can begin work before we show back up in Raleigh to have a conversation. So I think that having that game plan and the ability to be flexible has helped us out greatly. I have friends that are in other legislators in other states, and they come in, they have a set period of days that they come in, and then they go home. If we had a set period of days that we came in and then we went home, I think North Carolina would suffer. And we're still growing. We're 10.5 million people, and that requires a lot of work as well. The speaker works harder than any of us. He is at it 24/7, and I appreciate everything that he does, but it is nice to be able to come back and help the folks.
This all raises a broader question on how states position themselves over time. So with North Carolina's response to major events like Hurricane Helene, where do you see the state leading, either regionally or nationally, in disaster resilience and response?
You know, I think most of the time from the conversations I've had, folks do not recognize the role that the legislature can play. I have had some conversations with folks in other states that have experienced emergencies, disasters, and they didn't, before it happened, they didn't really understand the impact they could have. And I think now that they are in the storm and they recognize the fact that, you know what, people are looking to the state to lead, local governments looking to the state to lead, because they have a fixed revenue and they have a hard time just surviving day to day in some of these communities because they don't have a lot of money. The state of North Carolina has avenues that we have been able to tell other folks, they're looking for you. They want you there. We may not want to be in the middle of everything, but sometimes our money needs to be in the middle of everything so that we can make people's lives better. And I think that's been our greatest influence so far, is the fact of the way we have responded through the storms that we've had. Now people see that in these other states that, maybe it is more about getting to them, getting quickly, getting them the resources. I was in Georgia not too long ago, and they've done a lot of stuff down towards the southern part because they got hit by the same storm we did. And I think that some of this is contagious. I'm hopeful that a lot of these other states will take the same perspective as we move forward. And even though you don't have an endless budget, you do have a way to shift priorities pretty quickly in order to be able to help folks.
And what progress over the past several years and that you see upcoming are you most encouraged by?
I think we're going to restructure some of the things that we do as far as disaster response and recovery preparation. I was really concerned, given my background, that I saw a lot of YouTube videos of people standing in waist deep water in their housing. And that really bothers me. And we're working on that now to try to get an educational package out to where people understand it. At elevation, where I'm at, it's anywhere from about 2,700 feet up to about 6,500 feet in my area. That's a lot of water coming downhill at a high pace. And if it's in your house, it's going to pick up speed and eventually it's going to wash it away. Down on the coast, unless it's a storm surge, you don't see that a lot. Water comes up and some folks are used to it, but that's the thing that I think we're going to be able to make the biggest difference in, is getting people aware of, you need to get to safety. Yes, you're going to be wet. You need to get out of your house, get up somewhere, let the responders come and get you, take you to a safe place. But it's not worth being in these homes whenever the storm finally takes the home away. So I think that's going to be our biggest focus going into the future, is trying to get people to understand this true emergency, because most people just do not know.
Absolutely. I can attest that if I was in that situation, I wouldn't quite know what to do. I imagine if I lived in an area that dealt with these disasters, that I would learn or appreciate the opportunity to learn how to respond, or if I'm vacationing there, how do I respond? What do I do? Every state is still navigating, areas for improvement. We've talked a little bit about this. So when you reflect on Hurricane Helene and similar events, where did the system face a great strain, and what gaps still need to be addressed?
I think our greatest strain was no one anticipated you could not get to Western North Carolina during this storm. A lot of folks wanted to help, especially down east, because we have helped down there so much. But this is the first time that I'm aware of that it's actually been cut off. There was no way to get here. You couldn't get in from the west. You couldn't get in from the north. You couldn't get in from the east. You had to come up from the south, out of Greenville, South Carolina. And I don't think anyone had ever planned on that. We heard a lot of folks that were out in helicopters that were going in and getting folks and doing things. And I'm grateful that they were able to step up and help. No one has ever envisioned this. So I don't know where we go from here, but this taught us something that we had never seen before as a state. And I'm 59 years old. I've been doing rescue since I was 17 years old in the fire department. And this is just unheard of to me.
Yeah, Hurricane Helene just came so fast and impacted so many states. It was just a disaster I hope we do not see again in our lifetime. So as disasters, become more frequent and complex, as you just mentioned, I mean, nobody could even foresee that. So they're becoming more complex. Federal disaster assistance may become less predictable, and there are talks from the federal government of FEMA being restructured. I know that's been back in the news recently, within the last week. So what emerging risks do you believe policymakers need to be prepared for now?
I think our biggest thing that we need to do is we need to make sure we have the money on hand to respond. Everybody wants to count on the local governments and the federal governments to kind of take care of everything. At the state level, we need to have our funds to where we can respond. We had $5 billion with a B in the bank for this kind of an event. So far, we have spent 1.4 of that. So we've still got about 3.6 left. But we need to make sure that as quickly as we can that we put that money back, because it may be a coastal storm this year or 2 years from now, and those folks are going to rely on the exact same thing. So I think that's where we need to really work hard, is making sure that our states are in good enough shape to where they can manage it regardless of what the federal government does. The federal government's good about reimbursement. They're good about helping us. But at the end of the day, if we're not responding, the people doesn't care where the money comes from. They just want help, and they want to be able to see things being done and see the damages being repaired. And if we fail at that, then I think we have failed them.
And we're seeing a lot of chatter around FEMA and what could come next, and even recategorizing what constitutes as a disaster for a certain level of funding to get deployed by FEMA. So I just know there's a lot of kind of ebbs and flows or things happening on the FEMA level that will impact our states. And so you make a great point there. And, something I didn't think about, and I'm not sure why I didn't before we spoke. I mean, you all have the beautiful mountains from the Appalachia, and then you also have your beautiful Outer Banks with the coast. So you have several different angles that you need to look at for natural disasters. And to your point, it could be the coast next, and that is a little bit of a different response and impact as well. So just being nimble as a state, particularly with how you can respond and with that funding, seems like it could be the most important thing for states to brace for. So many of these challenges aren't unique to North Carolina. They're shared across the southern region. Many states have a similar makeup as your state, with coastal or mountains, some both, like North Carolina. So are there any lessons North Carolina has learned and implemented from other states when it comes to disaster response and resilience? And what role can organizations like CSG South play in that exchange?
I think one of the components I didn't recognize was how well emergency management connects across states. I didn't recognize until we started having the response and the recovery part of this, that we go to other states. We had folks on the ground in Texas. We have sent folks to Kentucky. We've sent folks to Tennessee. I never paid any attention to that whatsoever. So I think where CSG can come into play is that relationship that we have with these states. It needs to be pretty solid to where in the event that someone is needed, then we can actually send them the resources, or they can send us the resources like what happened here. We need to be able to have that relationship so that when an emergency strikes, that we can do something about it. And, I think that's one of the biggest things that CSG does for us, is it gives us an opportunity to get together, know some of these folks, and have a conversation with them so that it is personal. It is friends helping friends when things come about. I think that's going to be one of our future endeavors that you're going to be stuck with, trying to help put together, because I know sometimes legislators are great and sometimes we are very difficult people to keep corralled and keep busy because we like to talk. But I think that's going to be a great advantage, to be able to see more and more collaboration between these states that's orchestrated through you.
And since several of the states do have similar challenges and opportunities, I imagine it will be nice to have that network. So again, if a state has to come to respond to your state, it's actually something that they may have dealt with before, and vice versa. And that exchange of support and help, I know, has happened quite often. So I think that's wonderful. If there's any silver lining out of a disaster, it might be the amount of camaraderie and kind of grit that comes together in the South in order to get a community back on its feet. And we do that well in the South, it seems, as well as we can, and people just rally. So before we close, I want to ask a question that we're posing to all of our real estate guests. So what is the best piece of professional advice you've ever received that influences how you lead, whether in emergency response or in public service?
I thought I had all the answers to the world. I have always been one who studies and knows before I ask a question. I already have a general idea of what the answer should be. I spend a lot of time learning and that has served me well. But I worked at Farm Bureau Insurance, and my agency manager at the time, I was doing kind of what I do best, sitting and talking to people. And she stopped me one day and she said, she said, "You're pretty smart." She said, "You definitely know more than most of the other people in this room." But she said, "People don't care how smart you are. They just care how much you care. And when they can see that you care, then that's when they trust you." And that was one of the greatest things that she ever did. When Wendy told me that, I was like, I don't know if I like that or not, but the more I thought about it, I don't have to tell them everything I know, but I do have to intently care about the situation that they're in and try to guide them through it. And I've tried to apply that here in everything that I have done. Just make sure that people feel the heart part of it, as opposed to my mind may be rolling around, where in the world am I going to get this money from? But they don't need to see that. They need to see the fact that I do care about their situation. So I appreciate her taking the time to tell me that. That's just something she noticed in my personality.
Well, I've had the blessing of seeing your heart in action, Representative Pless. So thank you for your time and for sharing your perspective on this important issue. We truly appreciate your leadership and service, both in the legislature and on the front lines.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Well, and to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode of Real State. We'll continue to explore the leadership decisions and policy strategies shaping state governments across the South. More conversations like this are available at csgsouth.org. I'm Lindsey Gray. Let's keep it real.
Thank you for joining us today on Real State, where we keep it real about what really matters.